I want to welcome you all to the September 2011 Broadband Breakfast Club, Making Cities of the Future Smarter Through Broadband. And we'd like to thank the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club: Comcast, Google, ICF International, Intel, the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and the Telecommunications Industry Association. Please give a hand for our sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club. And I want to introduce the keynote speaker for the event, Gail Brewer. She's council member at the New York City Council. Councilmember Brewer has been representing the Upper West Side and the northern part of Clinton neighborhoods of Manhattan in the New York City Council since 2002. Her service in the council is a continuation of nearly 30 years of public service. Brewer currently chairs the Committee on Governmental Operations and chaired the Committee on Technology and Government from 2002 to 2009, where she worked to make better use of technology to save money, improve city services, and bring residents, businesses, and nonprofits closer to government and their communities. She also serves in a variety of other committees. Brewer has been instrumental in passing numerous laws, including a bill to establish the Broadband Advisory Committee and legislation requiring city publications to be made available via the web. In addition, Brewer was a member of the New York State Universal Broadband Initiative's Digital Information Technology and Communications Committee of the National League of Cities. As Deputy Public Advocate for Intergovernmental Affairs from 1994 to 1998, Brewer promoted legislation, wrote policy, and monitored the implementation of the National Voter Registration Act. Her website, The First in City Government, won an award from New York Magazine. Brewer has received numerous awards for her service and has taught urban policy at Barnard, Baruch, Brooklyn, Hunter, and Queens colleges. Gail has an MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and did her undergraduate work at Columbia University and Bennington College. Please give a hand for Gail Brewer.
Thank you very much. This is a huge honor to be here today, and I really appreciate the invitation. I know there are some people in the room who have tremendous expertise, so I'm going to do this just as sort of I see it from an elected official's perspective and the work that has been done with many other people. As Sylvia indicated, I did chair for quite a few years the Committee on Technology, and the great news is none of my colleagues knew what we were talking about. And there are 51 of them. So it was a great way to do things without everybody knowing what you're trying to accomplish. And you got stuff done that way. We had a great group. Bruce Lai, who worked with us, went on to run the technology for the Department of Education. Kunal Mahatra, who was with us, he went on to law school, but also to help Bruce along the way. Those two managed to bring in millions of dollars, and I'll talk about this in terms of the broadband technology. That was the stimulus money that came to New York, and I'll talk about how we put that program together. We have Sam Wong here, who's a good friend, and Michael Santarelli, who's now at New York Law School teaching and running their institute. So we also had, I think you know that Joshua Breitbart. He was with the People's Production House in New York and is now here at a foundation in Washington. I call it a posse. If you talk about how to make cities smarter in technology, you really need like a few members of the community, because it is, at least in the political world, technology is not understood what you can do with it, not understood what it means, not understood the changes. So we had this great posse. We'd have meetings every month in the city council, and all of us would sort of gather in advance to figure out how to think about a topic and how to advance the topic. And this was, with the collaboration with the mayor's office, because there were always a really enlightened group of people who worked at that end of things. Sometimes between the city council and the mayor's office, you'll have a lot of friction, but in our case, we worked together. One of the things that we did in the middle of sort of that time frame between 2002 and 2009 was talk about broadband. And I have to tell you, probably you all knew what it was in 2002, 2003, but I can promise you, the members of the city council, I don't know what they know now, but they definitely didn't know then. And so what we did was, but the mayor does. There's no question that, given his background, Mayor Bloomberg does. So what we did was, we realized that this overused name, digital divide, existed. You know, there are almost 9 million people in New York City. There are lots of low-income, middle-income families. And we kind of knew that something was going on in Korea, and there were, you know, municipal Wi-Fi attempts in different parts of the country, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia, and we wanted everybody to be connected. That's what we thought as we discovered it was so important to have this broadband advisory committee. And basically, we learned a lot because we got a committee passed. You have no idea what that's like. And then we had to get appointments. You know, these were real appointments. People had to go through background checks. Somebody comes to your house to make sure you actually live there, similar to going on a hospital board of a city or a state agency. People got a per diem, so it was a real advisory board. And the best part was, mandated in the legislation, was that the board, under the auspices of the council, with the collaboration of the mayor's technology agency called Do It, we went to all 5 boroughs. And working with the City University of New York, we had hearings 2004, 2005, 2006, when really broadband, although it was known to you in this room, it wasn't a common term that was understood. And we went and we learned from the shopkeepers, the librarians, the students, the seniors, the families, economic development, people in the industrial zones. Industrial zone people at that time had zero, I'm talking about zero connectivity in terms of anything broadband. There were very expensive satellites, but as you know, at least in New York, if you have cable at that time, you only had to go as a cable operator, some of you know this, to residents. So here we are in the industrial zones with underwater fiber often, because it was always underwater, and very expensive satellites, and older owners of factories who didn't understand the need to have any connectivity broadband. I was a riot. I would get in a car and go look for curtains. I figured if I found one curtain in an industrial zone, then the cable companies would have to come in, but I never found any curtains. So we learned so much from those hearings. They would last sometimes 4 or 5 hours. You had the top echelons of the city in terms of technology participating, and you had a lot of coverage of them. And people had never been asked for their opinions, ever. The libraries at that time were desperate for support. They obviously had E-rate from the federal government. But at that time, I swear to God, in Brooklyn, in the morning and in the evenings, you see people hanging around the library outside. And we all thought it was drug dealers. We didn't know. Well, it was people who can get connectivity free from the Brooklyn Public Library. And you see cots and chairs and everything, because that was a time when there was absolutely no free anything in terms of connectivity. So it was a different time because technology is always changing. At the same time, what we developed as a result of this advisory was something that we wouldn't have known how helpful. We developed an amazing group of nonprofits and for-profits, but particularly the nonprofits who are interested in technology. And this group, it was working in education, working in seniors, Computers for Youth you may have heard of, and Mouse, and Common Sense, and a group called OATS, which works with seniors, and the list goes on, People's Production House. They ended up, to be very honest with you, after really going with us to all the hearings, learning from us, again, this is part of sort of a development of infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure, for this issue of how to promote good technology and obviously good broadband as something sustainable at a time when things were changing all the time, and it's a fairly nuanced part of city government, how to make it smarter. This group of people ended up being the backbone for the BTOP grant. In other words, when the BTOP grant was available, who is going to be the sustainable groups who are going to make that grant worth applying for, who's going to apply for it with city agencies? Well, I feel very proud working with Sam and Kunal and everybody else that we really brought this group to the fore, to the attention of the city agencies and the federal agencies. And that was really what enabled us to get the largest BTOP grant in the whole country. And I think also one of the reasons we pulled off that, just to backtrack for a minute, was when the BTOP money was available, there really wasn't any one person who said, we're going to apply. And I have a lot of respect for city agencies, but the last thing they want to do is have more work, you know, just in terms of these are city agencies in the community. They've got enough on their hands, you know, trying to keep technology succinct and up to date with 80 city agencies, just how big we are, $65 billion budget. So we had a huge meeting. I mean, you couldn't get in the room in an old firehouse that's now converted to a nonprofit. And we dragged, kicking and screaming, the commissioner in to the meeting. I think he's never going to speak to me again. I was worried about it afterwards. Because he faced like 400 people who wanted to apply for this BTOP. And really, they didn't know how to apply. The city agencies didn't know how to apply. So it's an example of how you have to have both ends sort of coming together in order to be successful. So New York City, I think, is a model on sort of how to bring these different groups together for this really important thing called broadband. And I think that if you're sort of looking at the first step toward making the city smarter, it's to make, you know, smart decisions regarding the roles that city officials, from the mayor to the council to the agencies, play, and it makes a huge difference. So that's kind of the way we got started. I mean, New York City, as you can imagine, it's a unique laboratory because there is so many ways to leverage the broadband. And it really has been over the last 5 or 6 years that we've, you know, sort of taken this journey all together, and we'll have to see whether it ends up being smarter. Obviously, we all worry that when, in this particular case, where we'll talk, and I'll talk more specifically about some of the initiatives that have been taken, what happens when the sustainable BTOP money ends. And this is just one aspect of what we're trying to accomplish. I think also we talked about, at that time, the municipal Wi-Fi boom. And it was, I have to say, Gino Mancini, who was the commissioner at that time, who said, Gail, you're out of your mind. We should not be doing municipal Wi-Fi. And of course, we'd had the woman who was head of Philadelphia's challenging project, it wasn't challenging at the time, come talk to us. We had the people from Chicago, we had the people from LA, and it was his vision that I think said, hold on, there are other ways to go about this. And I have to give him credit, even though at the time I didn't like what he was saying. And then there was the, I talked a little bit about the Broadband Advisory Committee, and I think that what comes out of it, as I indicated, is both bringing the issue to the communities that are never asked for their opinions, and then as well bringing together this group of people who are able to apply for the funding. At the same time, the issue of really doing an intense study of what kind of broadband exists in the city of New York, what's under the streets, who's got cable, we've got Verizon, we had at one point 18 different companies, most people didn't even know their names, that had laid cable and then went bust. Nobody could find them, literally could not find the persons. I remember one person, a staff member, jumping into a manhole trying to figure out who was down there, but you know, that's a little crazy. But it was kind of a wild west in terms of laying the cable, and so to the credit of the Economic Development Corporation, in conjunction with the Advisory Committee on Broadband, Diamond Management, Chris O'Brien was from Chicago, was hired. He was absolutely the right person to do that, to try to develop what kind of possibilities for the cable exist and how close does it get to the buildings. And, you know, we don't really have last miles in New York City, but we might have last inches or last feet. And how do we maybe make that connection? And ironically, that's when we learned that the New York City Housing Authority, you have that in Washington, D.C. too, but we have 175,000 units and probably 100,000 people on the waiting list. And we all thought, you know, we could wirelessly work with them, but of course the walls are too thick. Period. End of discussion. You cannot possibly get through those walls, have any kind of connectivity for all those low-income families and individuals. So Diamond was able to do as much as they could in terms of telling us how much connectivity is possible and where it exists. And of course, I know there's somebody here from Verizon, I'll get in trouble, but I don't think, between the Verizon and the cable companies are always, having issues, and so they don't want competition to know where their cables are. So I'm not sure Diamond got everything they needed, but it was still a very helpful survey. And I think what you find is that there is a lot of connectivity in the city of New York, maybe like elsewhere, but it's expensive and obviously not as fast as you might like. The expense is what came up over and over again at the hearings, and it's what continues to come up. So along those lines, in addition to the work that we were doing in the schools, we also wanted to think about, what about the parks? What about places that the public goes? This is a true story. So we had a hearing in the city council with the parks commissioner to talk about Wi-Fi in the parks. And the good news was there was a reporter from the Times who was interested. Well, I swear to God, you're not going to believe me, but the issue of hotspots came up, and I asked the commissioner, why are there no hotspots? He turned bright red because he thought it meant something else. And that was a wonderful moment in the city government, for me anyway, because I was like, how could you not know this? But anyway, that turned into a New York Times story, not the hotspot, but the fact that we didn't have any of the ones that you are familiar with in the parks. And so obviously if you are low income at that point, people didn't have all the devices that we have now. But the fact of the matter is, how to use parks, how to use public spaces, etc. And so some companies got contracts. They didn't, City of New York felt they could make money off of these things, which didn't make any sense to any of us. So some of them went bust, and yet a great group called NYC Wireless, which is a nonprofit headed up by this great guy, and they started working with nonprofits in the parks to try to build wirelessly park opportunities. And I mention that because at that time, the Parks Department wanted to charge us $5,000 for insurance for this little antenna, which, you already are insured. So what are you talking about? So all these little crazy hurdles, when you talk about technology, you have to overcome. So we would just stick the antenna somewhere else and beam it into the park. The city to this day, just so you know in terms of some of these issues, in addition to the BTOP, the other thing that the city is working on is the franchises. And I don't know if this is true in every city, but obviously when we have FiOS, which is brought in by Verizon, we sign a franchise. And now just in the last couple of weeks, the cable companies, we have Cablevision and Time Warner, they just signed a franchise with the City of New York. So it's a lever, not the best one in the world, but a lever to be able to get some of this, what I call countering the digital divide, but that's a very overused word, but it gives you something to work with in terms of promoting local public access, promoting the parks that I just talked about getting access, giving more to supplement the E-rate. As you probably know in the schools, if you have E-rate, it's only in the classrooms. Unlike a college where you might find some access in the cafeteria or the teacher's lounge, E-rate only covers the classroom. So you need more support in the schools. You also need faster connections. The pipes are too small sometimes for the video that the kids are now doing. So everything we put as much as possible into these franchises. You want a franchise for the City of New York, A, you got to pay us some percentage, and B, you got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a whole list of things. So these are very long negotiations that go on. In terms of the parks, the City of New York, not my favorite negotiation, how it came out, but the issue is that they will, the Cablevision and the Time Warner, when you're in a park and you have one of those services, you don't pay. But if you don't have them, you pay a little something, I think it's per month. And then at the same time, AT&T wanted to come into New York, and they are giving free Wi-Fi in some of the parks. Still to be worked out which park, where, who gets what, etc. So it's not perfect, because I like free Wi-Fi, period, without any stipulations, but just so you know, that's going on. Another aspect to all this, which is fascinating, is seniors. You don't really think seniors, connectivity, they're the highest, fastest growing group getting on the online, and they need to be online. This group, OATS, that I mentioned, they got some federal money. They are working with seniors. There are two challenges. One is just to be connected in a neighborhood. Where in the world do you put what I would call a computer technology center. You might call a CTC. You put it, where do you put it that it's going to be sustainable for the seniors and for anybody else? And so libraries are the obvious, but in our city we're always, unfortunately, cutting back on libraries. So at the same time, we're going to put them in senior centers where others can come in, not just seniors. The excitement of having not only a working computer, but somebody to help you figure out what to do with it as a senior, you can't imagine. I just went to a graduation of one of these, and you start crying. I mean, these women, particularly from the Housing Authority, had had a computer from a grandchild in the house for 5 years, scared to death, never turned it on. And now, of course, grandchildren and pictures are part of the discussion. It's like opening up the faucet of beautiful, wonderful things for these men and women. So it's a fast-growing, for the obvious reasons, healthcare, but more importantly, grandchildren. And I would suggest that this is another place that broadband needs to play a role. Healthcare for seniors. Visiting Nurse Service is one of the most advanced groups in our city. They have to do home visits, thousands and thousands of home visits. And for years, you know, are they home, are they not home, talking to the doctor, talking to the nurse, talking to the health provider, totally nightmare. Take the information down, go back to the Visiting Nurse Association headquarters, contact the doctor, et cetera, et cetera. It's now all online. It's an amazingly sophisticated procedures that they're using between the patient and getting the doctors involved. If there are any doctors in the room, I apologize. Any MDs, nightmare. Did not want to participate. So they came in kicking and dragging. Nurses come in a second. Well, the doctors are a pain in the neck. But they got them online. And the interesting part is you'll go to Mrs. Jones's apartment, and it's a dead spot. You know, here you're already with your handheld, and you've got the doctors plugged in. So that's another example where this broadband has got to be everywhere. I also want to mention that as we're talking, just to go back to where do you put all of the connecting hardware? If you're going to connect low-income communities, where in the world do you actually do this? I talked about the libraries. I talked about the senior centers. As part of the cable franchise, Time Warner is going to build 100 centers around the city. I worry. Some of them are going to be in youth programs, and that's fine. Who's going to staff them? Who's going to make sure the kids are doing substantive work and not playing with games and things that are not healthy for them? All of this is sort of like what I call retail, on-the-ground work. If you're talking about broadband, you can have these big concepts up here, but somebody actually has to make it happen down here on the ground. In terms of what the schools ended up doing, there are 2 academic Department of Education BTOP programs. One is going to 100 middle schools, and one is going to what we call transition schools for older students. Middle schools I'm very familiar with. Computers for Youth, which is a nonprofit, takes the family from the whole school. 100% have to show up. On a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, I've been to many of them, all the students come, all the teachers, and all the parents. And the parents and the students are there all morning, and they discuss, the parents and the student, what this computer can do, and is an amazing website that Computers for Youth has put together, all academically oriented. At the end of the day, with a shopping cart, we don't have cars in New York, shopping cart, you go home with this PC. And you can't imagine the ecstasy. Most families, if they have a PC, it's not working. It's an older one. It's slow. In addition, you get, for 1 year, you get free service from Time Warner or Cablevision. This is all part of the BTOP grant. And it is, I just went to an event with one of the schools in my district, and the teachers are almost crying with the excitement because it's smartboard, it's learning, it's the math at home, it's the literacy, it's everything that you want. One problem, it's fascinating. There's always a glitch. One problem is that the deal that was cut with the franchise, nobody would have maybe guessed this with the cable companies, is that if you as a person, a family, have hooked into Cablevision or Time Warner in the past, you had cable, what everybody in New York does and everywhere else I'm sure is you have internet for a while, gets too expensive, you cut it off. You have your cell phone for a while, it gets too expensive, it gets disconnected. Same thing with cable. So many families have had cable, recession, unemployment, and they let it go. So that means that you're not eligible for this service. You'll have to pay full cost of the cable connection to connect to your free computer for your kid in middle school. I'm just giving you, when $50 is a lot every month, then this isn't going to work. So this is something that's got to be worked out, but it's again an example of this retail, I call retail broadband. You know, you've got to figure out how to get to some of these low-income folks. The other thing that's fascinating is the teachers are stating at the middle schools that have this amazing program, just in terms of what I have described, that the high school kids, this is where the demands are coming back to her, saying that the high schools don't have computers, don't have smart boards, and why don't they? So the kids become used to it, and then it's like going from Head Start to first grade, and the first grade is not as good as the preschool. So again, it's just the gaps are huge, even though we're doing everything we can. I'm not as up on what is going on with the schools that are the transition schools, high schools for the older students. The concept there is to try to do more online and video, because these students, they don't go to school. That's why they're in the transition school in the first place. And so the question is, how do you get enough faster connection to be able to pull all that off? And that's, again, another grant. And the third one that we got is one that I described with the seniors and the healthcare and the training centers, the computer training centers in libraries and senior centers and every place else we think where there could be teaching and sustainability. All of this is also very relevant to the small business community. The small business community, 98% of businesses in New York City employ 100 people or less. So we are not Exxon, we are not Goldman Sachs, which is what people think. We are a city of small businesses. I'm always surprised at how few have computers or anything that would connect them to a website or something else. You'd be surprised. Example. We have oil spills, we have hurricanes, we have all those kinds of things. And so FEMA comes in. I always love this. This is a riot. And two things happen when FEMA comes in. You think FEMA, small business wants money from FEMA. Wrong. I learned this a long time ago. Because everybody has two sets of books. I don't care who you are, you're a small business, you got two sets of books. And so you don't want FEMA looking at either set. Nor do you want to, but the other thing that we've learned, I learned that a long time ago, but the other thing is that you don't have connectivity. So FEMA came in. I don't know if we had a hurricane or an oil spill. I started laughing. FEMA sent an email to the stores. Well, nobody got it because they don't have a computer. They may have an email address, but it's not clearly something that they look at often. So this issue of how do you make the demand for the small business a reality, something they want to use, something that's quick enough, fast enough, etc. Many stores do not have a website. You'd be surprised at how many do not have a website. And so, again, how do we promote all of that? Verizon is having a conference on this coming up this week, just generally, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how to improve in this down economy, the small business, and is technology just one aspect of your business model. So I just want to conclude. I'll try to give you some picture of some of these issues. Again, a funny picture that we have to deal of elected officials are those cell phone sightings. Oh my God, the antennas. Now you would say if you are a technology expert, your attorney in the field, those darn elected officials, thank goodness the federal government tells municipal government that they have to put them wherever the cell phone company wants. Oh. And so I pretend, oh guys, be careful. I pretend that, you know, it's terrible to put it on that roof, which it often is. You can't put them near schools, but then everybody wants to use their cell phone, or everybody wants to use their device. So all those issues come down to the local, how do you work some of these things out? The President Obama has come up with some ideas that I think you're more aware of than I am. I've only read about them. Everything that can help promote these issues that I've just described with broadband and trying to make cities smarter. as I said, it's all in the implementation. You can have all these great ideas up here, but I tried to share with you some of the great ideas that are out there, but the challenges of actually implementing them with limited funds, and certainly the challenges of just policy. I haven't talked much about public safety and the first responders. Obviously, the City of New York has put in a system for first responders and folks who are interested in participating, but it's still, the World Trade Center, God help us, repeater problem may not exist, but I think communication between fire and police is still a challenge. And I want to just conclude by stating that I think this posse idea for broadband, if you're going to make cities smarter, is actually a good one, because in government and in the political world, the notion of how to make a city smarter in terms of technology is not fully understood. It's fully understood in this room and in academic circles and perhaps with a lot of students and all of you. But if you ask the average elected official, I'm afraid even on the Hill in some cases, how to, what their goal is and how to get there, I'm not sure you're going to get a full and complete answer. I'm certainly one that's got the big picture, but I'm always learning. And I'm delighted to be here and honored, and thank you very much. And I hope that gives you a little idea about smart New York City. Thank you.
So feel free to ask Gail questions when she's on the panel, because she's going to stay with us. So can I ask the panelists to come up now? Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Lynn Stanton. Lynn Stanton is a reporter at Telecommunications Reports and TR Daily. She's currently focused on broadband policy. She joined TR Daily as a copy editor in 1994, and for most of the past 17 years has reported on telecom regulatory policy. She has also covered pharmaceutical marketing issues for another trade publication. A native Washingtonian, Ms. Stanton studied political philosophy at the University of Maryland and the University of Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Lynn Stanton.
Good morning. I'm going to just briefly introduce the panel, but you've got longer versions of their bios on the table, I believe. Benjamin Leonard, who's right here directly to my left, is the policy director for the Open Technology Initiative at the New America Foundation, where he contributes to the program's efforts to develop and advance and advocate policy proposals aimed at achieving universal, open, and affordable broadband access and promoting open technologies through policy research, writing, and outreach. And then beside him is Ellen Satterthwaite, who is program manager at GigU, which you've probably all heard about. The project that started this summer. They just released a request for information last week to bring broadband to major research university communities. I believe we've got a workshop next week on that.
Next Monday.
And prior to joining the GigU project, Ellen was a consumer policy advisor in the FCC's Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. We have Gail Brewer, who you all just heard from. Beyond her is Sarah Williams, who's director. Too close to it? Okay. Is director of the Spatial Information Design Lab at Columbia University, where her research focuses on the representation of digital information, mapping, and ecological design and planning. Is that a good distance? Am I doing okay here now? Okay. And then at the very end of the table is Stephen Ezel, who, did I say that right, Ezel? Ezel, sorry. Senior analyst for information at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, where he focuses on innovation policy, international information technology competitiveness, trade, and manufacturing and service issues. And I thought just to start off and set a sort of a base of discussion, we could talk a little bit about what exactly a smarter city means to the panelists, how you would define that, what kind of attributes they have, and how they differ from cities that aren't so smart, and whether there are characteristics that contribute to making the city more likely to become a smarter city, whether it's population, size, density, the industries that are in the area. So can we start, Benjamin?
Sure. A little close to the mic here. Well, to me, I mean, a smart city is a pretty ambiguous term at this point. I mean, it's sort of like smart grid and all these other sort of smart things where supposedly technology fits in somewhere and it's supposed to do great things. So, in my mind, I mean, cities should really define it for themselves. I mean, I think that there's a clear intersection of technology, but start with the premise of what do I want to accomplish? What are my goals for economic development, for economic growth, for improving city services, and then how does technology fit into achieving those goals rather than let me cling on to the coolest tech thing or whatever and end up in a situation where it isn't really benefiting the community overall to make this investment. And I think also reaching out to your broader constituents in your community, I think as sort of Gail described too, like there's a lot of intelligence in terms of what needs to be done out in the broader community, and factoring that into the process and building from the ground up, I think you can achieve a much smarter city. Do you want to talk about what factors?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
In some of the research that I've done in terms of broadband infrastructure, and that is my expertise, but I think where you've seen communities make very strategic investments or plan, there's usually been some visionary or leader within the community. Usually it's in the IT department. One really good example is in Santa Monica, California. They had Jory Wolf, who started out as head of their IT department. They were paying all of this money for telecommunications access, and he sort of looked at the map and looked at the cost and said, we probably could make out better if we built our own infrastructure. And so they put in a telecommunications plan in place. They did a very, very gradual build out, made investments over time, and now they have one of the leading fiber infrastructures available to them that they use for all their city services. And it's so successful that they actually have now been able to, businesses, particularly movie studios that are doing editing and so forth, have stayed in their area because they now, rather than having to ship hard drives with movies on them, they can send them to each other via 10 gigabit connections, and so they made that investment, and it certainly paid off for them. So I think and you've seen this in other cities where you have a visionary, whether it's in government or even in the private sector, that comes in and says, we need to make these investments, we need to make these decisions and plan for the future.
First of all, let me apologize for digital illiteracy over there. But it woke us all up. So I think what Benjamin says is right on, with the leadership being a key factor. And then I fear that we all might repeat each other, but from our perspective, from the Gig.U perspective, collective action is the next issue, and that's collective action from, as you think of it typically in the kind of community organizing sense, but also collective action on the part of what are the key institutions. Certain areas have key institutions. We are working with a group of 37 universities and communities that have their own roles in their environment and have their own sets of leadership and things to bring to the table. And we feel and we think we have seen, especially with the Google Fiber project and with other projects in the past, some of which Benjamin has studied, that you also need the right mix of collective action on the part of different institutions.
I think I agree that the word smart city might be a bit overused. I don't know if you guys can hear me okay. But I think that a smart city is a city that's informed at its base, right? It's not just about thinking about smart cities as it relates to technology. It's about making informed decisions about the places that we live. And to have the ability for our residents, our community members to also make smart, informed decisions using data, analysis, and those kind of things. So I always think of, when I think of that smart cities idea, I think, how are we going to be more informed? And I think, how do we make better cities is, again, what we just heard is thinking about what your goals are, and then how can you set up the infrastructure to put those goals in place. So if we want to make better informed decisions, how do we set up the infrastructure to do that? And Bloomberg, who is a great data analyst and totally is interested in these kind of things, really is trying to set up some of those data infrastructure, not just thinking about broadband, but also thinking about, if we have 311 systems, how can we collect and use that data to make more informed decisions about the communities that we live in. Does DC have 311? I think it does, right? And that data can actually be analyzed. But one of the struggles I think all cities face, is now that we've got more data than we've ever had before, how do we analyze it? What are the policies around analyzing it? What are the privacy concerns around analyzing some of this data, particularly even with wireless technology, lots of data is coming about who uses it, where they use it, how are they using it, and I think figuring out how to analyze that to make better places is one thing that we need to think about. And I think that goes to the point that was again mentioned earlier. To really get some of these things initiated takes some visionary, because we've done things in cities the way we've done them. They're great. They've always been that way. So it really takes the leaders to show us examples of how we can establish change. It's not easy to decide to do something differently. In business it seems to make sense, but I think cities, they need more examples, and I think that's something that we really need to do as advocates for broader information technologies. How can we show examples of really great ways that technology can help people in low-income communities? How can we show examples of how technology can spark innovation within the city itself? Can we have technology that makes smarter streets? And I think that's what helps to create a visionary and some change.
I think I would only echo and amplify all those comments. It does, however, still start with having broadband access. A recent study by Polco in 2010, updating data from the mid-2000s, found that U.S. zip codes that moved from having 0 to 1 to 3 broadband providers experienced 6.4% faster employment growth than communities that did not have broadband access. So you still see this around the country, that communities that don't have adequate broadband access are falling behind, are losing business opportunities. Even in San Francisco, the CIO, Chris Veen, before he went to the White House, tells stories that they lost a lot of the CGI and animation business in San Francisco to Santa Monica, LA, and South Korea because they didn't have adequate broadband access, or at least sufficient for sending the files. So I think it starts with broadband access, but I think the next generation of smart cities is moving to smart devices. So it's not just about having your citizens with internet access, but you need the things in your city, your streetlights, your roadways, empowered with the ability to collect and disseminate real-time information. Ultimately, I think the definition of a smart city is one that empowers their citizens to make smart decisions. Whether that's, I should take the bus or the train this morning, mass transit instead of the roads because the traffic's backed up, and the city is giving me the ability to have insight into that information. One of my favorite tools in DC is just the DMV. The local DMV office has a photo of the live webcam of the line, and I can go down and take care of business when the line's not too long. So, the goal of the innovator is to empower your constituents or your customers to realize the change they want to see in the world. So I think that's the point of smart cities, is empower people to make smart decisions. And then to your point, we have to educate people with new tools of data analysis and statistics. Nobody should graduate from high school these days without being able to code a basic SQL query. That's just a sine qua non for the digital age, I think.
I agree. Hear, hear.
So I think we had 2 votes for visionary, sort of the great individual view of history, and 2 votes for collectives or policies, and 1 vote for devices, I think, there at the end. So, what are the biggest challenges to cities in becoming smarter? Is it a money issue, funding? Is it the current state of technology? Is it higher levels of government and the kinds of regulations that they impose? Is it resistance from service providers, whether it's they don't want people to know where their facilities are for competitive issues, or in some instances they might fear competition directly from the city? Why don't we start at the other end and work our way back down? Stephen?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is in recognizing that these types of investments in information technology are positioned to bring the greatest efficiency and productivity enhancements to a society. So this is where we have to make the tough budgetary decisions to invest in these types of technologies that bring efficiencies to economies. A study of e-government in South Korea found that for every dollar invested in e-government, generated a $17 savings and kind of economic return to society. So why don't we have sufficient computers in schools? Well, it's because we haven't been willing to make the hard choices to recognize that these types of investments are generating larger payouts than other things that we might be doing, and we're going to reallocate our budgetary resources, which are understandably scarce, to the types of investments that are having the greatest payoff. So I think it is, to this point, a leadership and vision issue, but it is around making these types of hard choices, and we have to invest in the things that have the greatest payoff, I think.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're going to be echoing each other throughout. I mean, I think the biggest barrier to entry is understanding the possibilities. I know that sounds like a really simple idea, but I think that there are huge challenges in getting cities to implement smarter technologies because they don't understand the cost involved and the possible kind of outcomes. They don't understand the cost benefit to them. And I think that's again where I'm going to make a call for examples of these possibilities. Like, I think that prototyping different examples and really being on the ground, showing how devices, which I agree, I think the city of the future is about, everything in the city is going to become kind of our computing system, our device, and showing examples of that. So how do we come over the political barriers, I think? And I don't think it's that we lack, obviously, Gail can attest, it's not like we have great people who are thinking about these things, and it's how to come together and explain to each other the possibilities and show that there are benefits and that data and technology can have a real public good outcome. And I think that's something that that's not always easy to do, and I think we have to educate each other to do that.
Did you want to?
I was going to say the best example, in New York there are only two industries or two discussions, real estate and how to get from point A to point B. Everybody, all you do is talk about how are you going to get there. And the MTA becomes your center of the universe. So I signed up for Notify NYC. Are you on that?
I am on that.
I love it. The other day I was going to get on the B train and it was flooded, so I went to the 1 train. But for all those people who don't have Notify NYC, they were right there in the middle of the flood. So people don't sign up for it. You can, even though it's publicized, you can't get them to sign up for it. Too much stuff coming into my email on my cell phone. Second problem is when the head of the MTA, and I like this, when is the train coming? I said, how am I going to know when the damn train's coming? Do I get in a cab? Do I wait for the train? Et cetera. Now there is some inclination, some little banner that tells you, some stations, when the train is coming, 1 minute, 7 minutes, whatever. We had it for the buses, and then something happened. I don't know. It disappeared. It's coming back. That's the technology that I think, to Sarah's point, it would help us. You got to keep showing the average person what broadband essentially and wireless can do for them. When Walter came in and he had done this in London, they didn't just give us some new trains. Just make them show up. Nobody wanted that signage, telling us when the train's coming, because they figured it's either that or we're going to get another train. So it's a hard challenge. So I would just agree we need examples. And that's one that I think is a good one.
So I'm thinking from a very kind of operational aspect to this, and we listened to Gail talk about how difficult it was to get all of the different kind of balkanized entities in New York City, not just running in the same direction, but talking to each other. And so I'm the program manager at Gig.U, which means I do community organizing, not in the community, but I organize the different entities in a community. So in some cases, and I'm not going to pick on any of our communities in particular, but I will have the Economic Development Corporation call me, and then 20 minutes later, the small business entities in the same city call me with a similar or related question, and I'm thinking, I think you all are in the same building. Don't you see each other at lunch? Those sorts of, it is by no means particular to any city, and I think that is one of the greatest challenges is, cities are working with smaller budgets, downgraded credit ratings, their own entities, and in a lot of places there isn't someone or a posse thinking about, well, how do we make this city smarter? Or there is a posse, and that's one of the 15 other things that people do as part of their job. So in some senses, I think it's been the biggest barrier to overcome is the nature of American metropolitan governments in general, but it's not insurmountable. As examples, like small examples, small wins like New York City or Chattanooga, or even, in different ways, some of these economic development clusters we're seeing throughout the country, that they've found a way to make themselves a little bit smarter, at least in terms of business. So, yes, we need examples, but we also need to consider that we may be set up for a challenge just by the nature of how we've organized ourselves.
Well, my sort of knowledge base is on the infrastructure side. So, to me, on that, with respect to that component, I think the greatest barriers are twofold. One, if you go through private networks, they're still quite expensive, both on the wired and wireless side, and they're not necessarily offering the kind of capacity and the model that fits with pushing a lot of data. The for-profit carriers, particularly the large publicly traded ones, they have very definite profit models, and whether or not that intersects with what a city wants to accomplish or a university wants to accomplish is unclear. And then for cities that may want to invest in their own infrastructure, there's an expertise issue as well as the upfront cost, even though making that investment over time may actually make more sense for the community in terms of what they're able to accomplish. It presents sort of an initial barrier. And then the other one is, going back to sort of the for-profit guys, it would be nice if they would be more willing to work with cities in a way, or at least understand that maybe I can't meet those needs. So, the example that comes up is Wisconsin. So, Wisconsin Net, which is this institutional network that covers universities and provides them with really high capacity connections. They got the VTOP grant, and then AT&T lobbied basically to have the government, the state, give that money back, to the government, and move several of the schools over to BadgerNet, which was AT&T's product, which may be an okay network, but it certainly wasn't offering the kind of connections that Wisconsin Net was offering, nor at the cost. And so, it's okay if you can't meet those needs. We understand there's a profit model and you have a certain level that you have to serve at, but to be sort of so antagonistic towards a lot of these efforts, rather than trying to figure out, well, where can I work with them and where can I fit in, I think is problematic and is really counterproductive to really using broadband to improve cities.
I've got a lot more questions, but I think we probably want to give the audience a chance as well. Sylvia, do we have a handheld mic for people that want to ask questions, or does anybody have a question?
No, so we don't. So I'm just going to move back and forth.
Okay. No service providers out there want to defend themselves? Okay, well,
okay.
Think about it and tell us.
Good panel so far. Dan Lubar, Relay Services, here in town visiting, and I wanted to ask a really sort of general question, should hit all of the panelists. Recently, the FCC reached down in its public inquiry about the Universal Service Fund reform process that is going through. It should end up happening hopefully next month, coming to a head next month. They asked for state and local governments to provide input. We're sort of even down below a layer into that when we're talking about local communities. There's no real process for local communities to provide that input. What's the best practices, if there is one, for local communities to counteract issues like the one you mentioned? Is that a local PUC kind of jurisdictional thing? What's the mechanism to prevent, to put local communities first as opposed to other entities?
Who is your question directed to?
Anybody else?
Anybody. Who would like to answer?
I think Ben should. And then I'll go after you.
Okay, all right. I don't know if there's like a specific process. I mean, I think clearly communities have to recognize that they have to take ownership of their broadband future, sort of to be cliche, because, you know, again, the incentive structures are different for business, particularly telecommunications providers. And, you know, again, it's I understand where they're coming from, but, you know, so you have to build in those structures. You have to sort of, you know, in some ways the FCC has been not necessarily encouraging that. I mean, we've seen discussions around rights of way practices where, you know, there's some discussion of trying to create a national standard and so forth. And, you know, I think anything a community can do to educate itself, to figure out what is it I want to accomplish, and then plan for that, and then figure out where does private or public partnerships fit into that, you know, needs to be a part of the process. But I have the feeling in the end that it's going to be up to the individual community to say that I'm going to have this process, we're going to figure this thing out, and we're going to do what's best for my community, not necessarily what's best for someone else, and define those goals that way.
So I think Benjamin's exactly right. As a very recently former FCC employee, and some of you may snicker when I say this, but it whatever the FCC does has to rely on the record, at least on its face. So, and recently the FCC has undertaken several just operational reforms that should make it easier for communities who don't have traditional lobbying efforts, or even smaller entities, to file comments with the commission and to have their particular perspective heard. And I will say also that the commission doesn't know what's going on in these communities until somebody tells them. So they hear a lot from other entities and don't hear about the exceptions or the silent majority, if that is the case. And you know, groups like the New America Foundation, other public interest groups, do a very good job of aggregating those experiences, but they also, like the FCC, you know, they're based here, so they can't reflect that experience as well. So file comments and make phone calls and be as persistent as to the extent you can be as persistent as the folks who do have a presence here in Washington and do make those comments and make themselves heard.
I mean, in a city like New York, where you do have lobbying, there are 8 or 10 people in the city's lobbying office here in Washington. I used to head it up, so I'm familiar with it in a different administration. But the fact of the matter is, between the National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, and resolutions passed by a city, that would constitute, and I know we've testified as a city council and as a mayor's office separately on different aspects. But I think it's often groups like that we've talked about that bring issues to the council members to say this is something that you should pay attention to. Mayors may know about it, but city councils may not.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, while you're thinking, someone, I think Ellen, someone mentioned privacy concerns. Privacy concerns from the analysis of the data. But what about just the privacy concerns from the increased awareness that City Now has, maybe of your location based on these smarter cities and about just everything that's happening in the cities? Do you see resistance from communities based on that? Does there need to be more thought about how those kinds of issues are addressed? Anyone?
I mean, I think this is a huge issue and a barrier in some ways to some implementation, but then also something that needs to seriously be considered. And I think it is a current hurdle in kind of how we think about some of these technologies, because without having good policy around the privacy of your data, it's hard to implement certain types of technologies because we don't feel comfortable with them. We don't want people to know where. Nobody wants to be tracked or have this kind of constant knowledge of where we are. And we do have that ability with a lot of this technology, but at the same time, there's a lot of public good involved with understanding. Let's just take like cell phone analysis. You know, it's like we know. Like right now, AT&T can make a map of where everybody's talking on their cell phone, which can help us with understanding traffic and managing flows in our city, and perhaps in an emergency event, navigating people to better routes. But we do have to really consider the privacy of people, and so figuring out, I think it's a huge thing that we need to discuss. How do we create policy around using some of this data for a public good while maintaining the citizens' privacy? And I don't think that's something that we've come up with, and I think it's I would make a call for legislation around it. I mean, I think there's tons of benefits that we could have, and I think overall, I mean, right now, I think it's something. The statistic is 80% of the data that we collect is privately owned data, but a lot of that privately owned data could be used for public good. So how do we make this relationship between private data that could be used for public good? And it comes down to some of these privacy issues that we need to think about.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that issue?
Well, we are working on an open data bill, and you know, you hear about the apps, but then when we want more data to be open, back to your same issue, and it's complicated. You know, we want to know how many homeless, we want to know how many people on food stamps. We want all that, not just where you can get a parking space, with all due respect to the apps. But you know, still, where do you draw the line? You know, and we're drawing it, but it's a challenge. And the other issue, we passed a bill a long time ago on electronic health records, which makes sense. You want to be able to not have to put your name and your information down 10 different times. And particularly when you're poor in the city, you have to fill out a million different forms. But you know, you gotta be careful. And I think this issue of cameras. You know, you talk about cell phones, but the cameras are there also, and they're good for tracking criminals. That's true, but at what point? And then a lot of residential buildings, we've always done it in commercials, we're mandating that you have a smart card to go in and out of what had been middle-class housing, to be honest with you. And, you know, people are, it's new, and I don't know the answer. That's privately collected data.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a huge issue. You know, like, I think if we can create policies that allow for privacy to be maintained within that data, there's a lot of potential for good, but there is a lot of potential for, I guess, problematic uses of that data, and I think we need to figure out how to deal with that. I actually have to go teach the next generation of students about statistics and data analysis, so I'm going to depart, but thank you for having me. Got to catch a train back to New York. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, I know. Was there any other questions from the audience, or should I?
I just want to say that when I think transparency
Okay,
has got to be vitally important, and all cities should have transparent privacy policies for how they're using citizen data. I think we're retaining the right of citizens to opt out of engagement in these types of digital tools. Should always be the case. There was recently a case of a school in California that put in place a system where their students could just swipe their cell phone using near-field communications across a reader on the door to mark their attendance in class. Well, that's a great tool. Students love it, right? I mean, it's just we're going to take attendance, right? Well, there were folks around town who said, well, this is kind of like branding students as a herd of cattle, and giving them a digital electronic mark. Well, that's just ridiculous, right? No student's being compelled to sign in that way. If they don't want to, they don't have to.
I would think most of them would think, oh great, I give the card to my friend, they swipe the card, I'm going to have to be there.
So we need to have a balanced conversation that recognizes that we need to maintain personal privacy rights, but that these types of tools have incredible benefits for individuals and for society as a whole.
I think I saw one hand out here.
Tanya Sullivan with Plus One Communications. I was curious, we've been talking a lot about broadband as it relates to telecommunications technology. What about broadband as it relates to smart grid? I know it was brought up by someone, but where do you see smart grid factoring into your smart cities?
Well, smart grid is, I think, had a lot of promises made, and as it related to broadband in particular, I think there was this sort of expectation that you would have sort of this robust communications happening within the smart grid frame using broadband. I think, it's been walked back from, in part because the way smart grid has been sort of developed, who's driving that development is the utilities, and the utilities have very sort of narrow goals with respect to smart grid. I think, they are much more interested in the metering side, which doesn't require a huge amount of broadband capacity. I mean, you're really pulling very thin data from the meter in terms for billing and for, unfortunately, remote shutoff and laying off, traditional meter collectors and so forth. So I don't think you've seen kind of the potential that may exist there for sort of the marriage of broadband and electricity to make a smarter grid. And I think that's because there hasn't been a lot of leadership, particularly at the federal level, I would argue, with what do we actually want to accomplish with smart grid. Do we want to actually make a more efficient grid rather than just focusing on, the metering side of the equation. And so you have a situation where we're not necessarily what was expected by some, folks is not happening because of the way the process is playing out.
I wanted to pick up on that comment about laying off the electricity meter readers, because this type of thinking that technology costs us jobs has become a little bit too prevalent in Washington. We even had our president recently say that part of the economic travails our country is experiencing is that as technologies like ATMs or grocery checkout systems displace grocery clerks, that cost our economy jobs. And the evidence is quite clear. A recent OECD study makes clear that technology shocks lead to job creation over not just the mid and long term, but even the short term. Yes, there are near-term displacements sometimes from the effects of new technology, but whenever we are able to reallocate our resources in a society more efficiently, that means that the savings that are realized from not having to employ a grocery checkout clerk are realized by consumers in other parts of the society, right? So you're spending more time at restaurants, you're watching more movies, and the same thing would be the case with the smart electric grid readers. And the evidence is clear from cities like Houston or Seattle or places in South Korea that have put in place smart grids, that their citizens realize on average 6 to 10% electricity savings on a monthly basis. So that's realizing gains for consumers. It's also realizing gains from society that we don't have to do as much peak electric energy production, and of course we're decreasing our consumption of carbon and fossil fuels. So smart grid does portend the ability to achieve dramatic increases in efficiency in our energy production and distribution system, and also realize real savings for consumers. And it goes back to that point about giving me the tools to make smart decisions in my life, when to run the washing machine or the dishwasher. We're only beginning to scratch the surface of what a smart grid can mean for society.
Steve, you mentioned earlier the idea that going to the DMV when you could see on some kind of camera that it was not crowded, and a lot of the advantages that smart cities have in terms of more efficient government services. I was wondering, to the extent that small businesses and residents who don't have broadband and aren't getting broadband, how much does that contribute to having to run two parallel systems? Maybe this is more a question for Gail, but anybody can jump in. Does that sort of wash out the possible cost savings to a city from going to a more efficient way of delivering services.
I'll just do one small example. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. I have a friend, he just opened a pizza shop. It's a beautiful pizza shop. I don't know if the pizza's any good. I had a little people concerned about that. But it looks beautiful. And so I'm sitting with him, and he's got his BlackBerry or I guess it was an iPhone, and he's looking at everybody in the pizza shop, making the pizza at his law office. I guess that's normal. I don't know. I couldn't believe it. And so if that's where we're at, for a lot of folks, that could be a really good use. I mean, I thought it was a little peeping Tom, to have your workers know that boss is watching you and he's at the law office. But it's the use of technology. But I don't know when it will come to everybody. I don't know. It was quite a, it's done obviously with the children. Horrible parents watch The Nanny. I find that offensive. But where are we going with this? I don't know. Where does, again, privacy, is it good for business? Does it improve the economy? Are there savings? Etc. I mean, it's got different aspects to it, pros and cons, I would say. But it is a good use of fast connectivity if it's used for the right purpose.
So, I was inspired by your talking earlier about the small businesses who lack the internet access. I pulled up a study we had done last year called 25 Years of the .com Economy. Did an econometric study of what the existence of the internet over the past 25 years has meant for the world. The U.S. economy is $2 trillion larger annually, $2 trillion larger than would otherwise be the case because of the existence of internet tools and applications. There's more to go. Our study found that U.S. businesses are actually 10th in the world in terms of having a website, so we're somewhat down the list there, unfortunately. But to make clear also, it's really the ability of businesses to use the internet and have access to the tools and the business models that can create that are a key driver of growth in these firms. So, for example, one study of 6,000 firms found that the adoption of broadband internet by these firms led them to realize a 10% increase in their productivity. And the reason this is key is because it translates into wages and wage growth for employees. So a study of internet users in the U.S. found that use of the internet is associated with higher wage growth, in part because it imparts higher skills in the employee set. So the linkage between the increases in productivity that firms can realize from using internet technologies translate into wage gains for employees, and that makes us all happy.
We're all looking at that .NYC, .Berlin, .Paris, or whatever. The ICANN, which is the international organization, is about to start looking at some of these issues. And again, it takes a lot of discussion. It takes different people thinking about the right way to do it. And there's a lot of money to be made for the city, some, for a middleman company, some. How does it impact those businesses that you just described, pro and con? But it's, again, lots of discussion. And thanks for the city. Yeah.
I just want to add quickly to that point. We're thinking about the U.S. and smart cities in the U.S., but there's also a global perspective here. It's been shown that a 10% increase in internet broadband access in developing economies contributes to a 1.38% increase in GDP in those economies on an annual basis. So it's not just in the United States and the developed world. Getting these technologies into cities in the developing economy is really how we're going to lift a lot of those individuals out of poverty in those nations.
Hi, I'm Ryan Bass with Internet2, and just had Ellen, I hate to put you on the spot, but just had a quick question for you about Gig.U. Obviously heard a lot about it in our community. Wondering kind of just what the fit is in the overall ecosystem as you see it, and specifically thinking about some of the things that Ben was talking about today with the WISNet issue and things of those nature. Wondered if there was a potential for, or if it was a priority for Gig.U to, try to combat some of those things that are going on in some of those communities, and how, if possible, how we could work together to do so as well.
No, thank you for putting me on the spot. I think this is why I get paid. So Gig.U, for those of you that don't know much about it, who's familiar with the Google Fiber project? So our aim is to do Google Fiber backwards. So what Google Fiber did, Google said, we're going to build a network, and we're going to build a network for one of you communities. And so the communities competed with varying degrees of success, and there was a winner announced. And then there were lots and lots of losers who had taken that time and organized themselves and really were itching to participate in ultra-high-speed test beds and really want to upgrade their communities. So our members are 37 of those communities. They're research communities, research universities and communities that got together and organized under Gig.U and the Aspen Institute and want to do it the other way. They are asking providers, they are asking traditional providers, they're asking their utilities, they're asking other vendors in the space, Google, Amazon, Intel, what can we do as cities, as communities, what can we offer you to build test beds in our communities, to upgrade our communities to ultra-high speed broadband. So our role as Gig.U is the convener. We are the organization that we just released an RFI on behalf of our members asking just those questions. What can our communities do? Here's some information about them. What do you all have to offer, and do you have any information or proposals that you might be willing to make? So our approach is to use collective action to attract some private capital, to attract, and potentially public investment as well. We're not looking for federal money, and we understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. This is really the next step in this conversation. You asked how Internet 2 and how these research, Lambda Rail and the other research networks, some that are more regionalized, are involved. They're very involved in the conversation. I mean, these organizations own a lot of assets own a lot of assets and or operate a lot of assets in the communities that we're working with, and have shown an interest in being involved in creative solutions. There's, my guess, and I think our hypothesis is that whatever networks are built won't operate on a model that any of us have really seen before, or at least not seen on a wide scale before. So I get to say, since we're so close to the beginning of the process, that Internet 2 can be as involved as Internet 2 wants to be. And I know we have representatives coming to an open meeting that we're holding in Chicago, along with representatives from major providers and some regional providers, communities, the research universities that are our members as well. And we'll start that conversation in earnest next Monday. Anyone else out here with us?
Hi, I'm Sam Wong. I'm a student at George Washington University, so I'm also a friend of Gail's. And I think this question is kind of on either Benjamin or Stephen. So is there any economic study on the price elasticity of broadband and broadband adoption? And second, how would that impact a lot of the broadband access and adoption in city planning? Because if there are any examples where cities can negotiate the pricing level for the appropriate level of utility or the budget constraint of that city, it would be pretty interesting to see if, obviously there are national rates, there are local rates, there are regional rates, but could there be a specific rate for that region, for that community, for that, low-income families, would that be suitable?
So I know my colleague Rob Atkinson has written about that topic specifically. I'm happy to send you papers he's written, but I don't think I'm the expert on that particular topic.
I'm not familiar with any particular studies, so I would like to read that study if there's a particular one on elasticity, because I know that from what the FCC survey research has shown, that cost is always one of the top factors. It's not necessarily the top factor. And it's clearly an impediment, I think, for not just sort of getting folks to adopt initially, but also as we move forward, actually getting businesses and government to utilize higher capacity connections and all the benefits and applications that go with that. My sense is that cities have negotiated with, particularly through like the through the franchising process, you can make those negotiations. What has been proven successful, though, for a lot of communities in terms of negotiating down prices offered by private carriers is either A, building their own network, or proposing to build their own network, and then suddenly the prices start to fall. So, I think the private companies, again, they have their bottom line, and they have often national pricing, and there isn't a huge amount of wiggle room, or they're not willing to budge until there's a real reason for them to budge, and so it remains a challenge.
I'd also add to that while I'm sure, and I believe it is an issue, I think an as big or bigger issue is the lack of computer ownership. So the U.S. has computer ownership rates that are 80% of those found in Japan and South Korea. And when you do studies asking people why they don't have broadband access, I believe it's as much as 34% that just say we don't have access to a computer to use the broadband. So that's part of the problem as well.
How do we compare in terms of using other devices? Because with smartphones.
The penetration is much, much higher. I mean, everyone has a basic cell phone. What you can do with that compared to a computer is debatable. And then even smartphone penetration, I'm not sure what it's at. I mean, it's been growing tremendously every year. But again, you sort of come into what is it the same experience that you would get with a computer at home versus what you can do on your smartphone? There are significant limitations with how the phone is designed and what you're capable of doing. So at this point, I don't think they're equivalent. But clearly, the trend is steep in terms of increasing for smartphone adoption.
There seems to be a tendency when comparing mobile devices to fixed wireline service and to sort of see the fixed as the standard, and so any differences are always, wireless isn't as fast, therefore it's not as good, and less discussion of, well, fixed is fixed, therefore it's not as good. And I was just thinking of that when you were mentioning on the smartphones you can't do as much, but maybe for certain people, especially those who don't have the experience with a desktop or a laptop to know what that looks like, it might even be less intimidating than the people who are afraid to turn on the computer. They've got 5 years, but they pick up a smartphone, and there's an app for that, whatever it is they want to do, like when is the train coming, when's the next bus coming, that kind of thing.
I think, yeah.
Thoughts on that, or?
I guess, so prior to my current position, I was at the FCC. I worked on the adoption part of the National Broadband Plan and transitioned into that role at the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And the one comment I will make, you're right, people mention it, and they're kind of kicked out of the room when they say that. Or so luckily no one said anything. But I also think that what we do see, in the Pew studies and in our own work at the FCC, is that wireless is almost always a supplement, or it's always almost a complement, not a supplement, to fixed connectivity. And then you start talking about effective use, and what is effective use, and then that goes back to a smart city, and what is a smart city, and what are the goals of using your connected device. And maybe it is, maybe we should start having that discussion about the range of uses and the range of connectivity, but considering we're not there yet in terms of wireless or in terms of wireline, I'm inclined to be technology neutral and say we're trying it from both sides. So, but I think that's a worthwhile conversation to start.
Did you want to add anything?
I think the answer is both, and a lot of both.
I think we're right about at 10 o'clock, so unless somebody had a really burning question, I guess we'll wrap things up. If you could thank the panel and Sylvia for all of her work, and
the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club, any announcement about the next one, or?
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, the panelists. And let's also thank again the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club, Comcast, Google, ICF International, Intel, NCTA, and TIA. Thanks again. And I want to point out on the back of the program is listed our next Broadband Breakfast Club, which is October 18th, bringing broadband infrastructure to rural areas. Where is the progress? Thanks again for coming.